What's up, guys? We're back with another video. It is Tuesday, and there's been some interesting news past couple days since I did that last video over the weekend. So I figured I'd jump on my way to work and talk about a few things. I know I haven't really had a schedule for this sort of I don't know. I don't even want to call it a podcast. It's kind of just like a video rant that I do a few times a week. But I think moving forward, I'm going to try to nail down a schedule and get a little more consistent with it. Maybe do something like Monday, Wednesday, Friday videos or something like that. Maybe. We'll see. Anyway, so there's been a few things that I thought were interesting, so I was going to talk about a few different topics going on in the news right now. In regards to the whole Nick Shirley and fraud in Minnesota with all these Somali-run daycares and healthcare facilities and all of that. The interesting news that has come up is that Tim Walz has stepped out of his reelection campaign for governor, which I found pretty interesting. Honestly, I would say that's like probably as close to an admission of guilt as you're going to get from an American politician in this day and age. They never really admit to doing anything wrong, even when it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So the closest thing you can get is when one of them just decides to not run again or something like that. It's pretty close, if I would say, in my opinion. It's essentially an admission of guilt, or at least an admission of forthcoming information that would not be so good for them. So I thought that was very interesting. There's some interesting implications from that. Not only, I would say, although people are trying to make it like there is this push to try to discredit this information coming out, but I would say this is pretty much confirmation that, you know, Nick Shirley's expose had some reality behind it. So, yeah, I just thought that was interesting. I think that is great. And I think Tim Walz, there were a lot of issues with Tim Walz, to say the least. But that guy was very like almost our vice president. And to see somebody like that, a corrupt politician, a politician that really just was still acting as if it's 2016 and we're still all playing along with all this DEI stuff. And I mean, there's just not energy in all that woke stuff anymore like there was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. That all that stuff moving forward should be an albatross around any elected official's neck. It should be completely disqualifying. I know in the Democratic Party it's not, but from my perspective, great. Let them win primaries on the woke platform and let them get destroyed in general elections. That's all upside, in my opinion. So I'm happy about that. The only other thing that I thought was pretty interesting about this was that it really speaks to how quickly we've had a true like revolution in the media landscape. 10 years ago, to think that somebody who was very close to being the vice president of the United States would be completely removed from political power because of a YouTube video that came out, and just a random YouTuber alleging, fraud throughout somebody's state. I just don't think anybody would have had that as like a prediction that they had. And I think it is great that it's like very obvious that people have completely shaken off the illusion that corporate media is legitimate and they are telling the truth, because Nick Shirley's video got millions and millions of views all over different social platforms, and the corporate media swooped in afterwards and tried to pretend, oh, this is completely discredited, none of this has any basis in reality. They tried to discredit Nick Shirley. They tried to say, oh, these Somali daycares officials say these are operating as they are supposed to be. And when you go into the comment section, absolutely nobody believes them. It's just like, nope, completely. The corporate press has been completely delegitimized, and that is one of the most optimistic pieces of information that anybody that's like blackpilling out there, you're like really thinking that there's no hope or anything like that. Like, sorry, but corporate media being delegitimized is one of the best things that's happened to this country in 100 years at least. And the only thing that I would say that you should watch out for, now that we're in this new media landscape where like YouTube and X are like the major platforms that people get their news on, is, as some people would call it, and I think it's a very apt way to think about these things, like the Mockingbird media, as in the deep state controlled media, the media that is beholden to all these special interests and corporate interests and foreign interests. Operation Mockingbird being the CIA operation that was infiltrating media, corporate media, and installing hosts and promoting certain narratives and all of that sort of thing. That's not going to stop just because the media has been decentralized. I think it's very obvious to anybody who has a good handle on these things that there are already, and have been already, many operators of these various interest groups within the new media landscape. And so you need to be able to figure out for yourself which of these people are legitimate, which of them are bought and paid for, which of them are truly independent, and which are not. That's an acquired skill. It is going to be influenced by your personal beliefs. If somebody is spouting all the things that you like to hear, you are much more likely to take them as a legitimate and trustworthy person. And so just watch out for that. There is like this sort of confirmation bias that you have to be aware of. Like, there's been people that say all the right things, and I go, oh, is this person on my team? And then you find out in some other instance, oh no, this person's not on my team at all. They were just saying saying the things that made them sound like the guy that was real. I think one of the best examples of that is Dan Bongino, who was a very popular commentator talking about dismantling the deep state, dismantling the intelligence agencies, how they couldn't be trusted, how they couldn't be reformed. Next thing you know, he's the deputy director of the FBI, and he just goes, oh, the Epstein thing? There's no there. Sorry. Oh, don't worry, guys. It's just not, and he plays along with, oh, it's a Democrat hoax. Oh, there's no Epstein files. Oh, it's like, and now, so he's been completely like just trashed online for this entire administration pretty much, or at least after the first couple months, because he just like completely turned around and discredited all the talking points he had prior to being part of the administration. So he essentially got booed out of his position. And now he thinks he's going to return to the podcasting space and still have any credibility. And he's in for a rude awakening, I would say. Of course, there's a bunch of like corporate media adjacent people and the war party and, the Trump loyalists. And they're going to say, oh, Dan Bongino, a true patriot. He's our guy, blah, blah, blah. But the public ain't buying it. Trump's own base isn't buying it. And he's in for a rude awakening when he goes back to his show, which is apparently what he's gearing up to do. So anyway, just be aware there are these operators within the new media landscape that are not real people. They are, they are actors on a stage and somebody's paying them. So watch out for that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was a continuation of this whole Venezuela operation that happened. There's sort of more information coming out about what the plan is here, what we're doing. A lot of it is like conflicting information. Originally the Trump admin was like selling it based off the drugs, the alleged drug trafficking, the narco-terrorism. Then it became, oh, well, they stole oil from American companies that were invested there. And we're doing, so there's been a bunch of different justifications for it. Oh, he's a communist dictator. We should overthrow him. It's good to overthrow communist dictators. So there's all these conflicting narratives about the reason that this operation happened. And, there always is, I guess. I think this was probably like the sloppiest handled foreign policy, like sales pitch that I've ever seen attempted. I just feel like aside from that same group, like the war party, the Trump loyalists, like everybody else is just like, this is like pathetic. There's not even a coherent sales pitch here. And I would just say like the part, so that's fine. I mean, if there was a coherent sales pitch, I feel like the same people would have been for it and most of the same people would have been against it. So whatever. The part that's interesting now that's sort of developing is the plan now, because Maduro's been ousted, but his opposition has kind of been discredited by the Trump administration. And then they said that the vice president was now going to be in charge, but then that vice president was saying, oh, well, nothing's changed and Maduro's still the legitimate president of the country. So there's like kind of conflicting perspectives about what's going on here. And the rest of the cabinet is still there. The rest of the regime is still there. So, and then Trump is saying now that the U.S., like we, as in the U.S. or the Trump administration, is going to run the Venezuelan government as long as is necessary, which is kind of funny if you take into consideration the fact that, so one of these narratives to sell the intervention was that Maduro was not a legitimately elected president. The last election was illegitimate, blah, blah, blah. And it's so now Trump has claimed the right to overthrow that government, and now he's in charge of it. Meanwhile, Trump's obviously never been elected as Venezuelan leader. So that's kind of like a contradictory set of statements. Like, you can't have it all these different ways at once. So I just thought that's funny, and I guess we'll just see what's going to happen here. As I said in the last video, I'm pretty much in a wait and see mode. Let's see how it goes. I'm not claiming it's going to be as catastrophic as our interventions in the Middle East have been, but it could be. And, there's already been sort of conflicting reports about what the migrant situation is, because it's okay, well, all the Venezuelan refugees that are here, now that they no longer have this evil, scary dictator that they've been running from in power, you would think that, okay, well, you guys can go back home. And they have revoked that's the refugee status, whatever it is. It's TPS is the acronym, I think. But I just all of these narratives seem kind of incoherent, and so I'm just gonna wait to pass judgment and not be too crazy about it. One other thing that I think that people are kind of missing, or most people are kind of missing, is people are saying, oh, it's for the oil, it's for the natural resources, it's for corporate interests. And it's yeah, probably to some extent that played a role in what happened here. But also, and probably more importantly, I think one of the motivating factors here was also that Venezuela was selling their oil outside of the petrodollar system. If you understand what the petrodollar system is, essentially in 71, Nixon took us off the gold standard, because before we had a US dollar that was allegedly backed by gold, the whole Fort Knox, and let's audit Fort Knox and see if we still have gold, and blah, 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 all that stuff. And so he took us off the gold standard, which essentially meant that there was no backing to the US dollar. The US dollar just became pieces of paper with nothing of actual value to back it. Now, the fix for this was the creation of the petrodollar system. What is the petrodollar system? Well, essentially, the U.S. Negotiated this deal where, because it was, aside from the Soviet Union, which at that time was kind of in slow, but in some case, in many perspectives, inevitable decline. But, so essentially the U.S. was the great power in the world, and many people saw it as going to be that moving forward. So they negotiated this deal where pretty much the whole Middle East, where most of oil reserves that, you know, are being extracted and refined come from, would only be allowed to sell oil in US dollars. So you can only, once you've accepted that system where you can only pay for oil using US currency, well, that gives US currency value. Because if you're forced to have US currency in order to trade for oil, which is a good that every country needs, then you're always going to need US dollars. You're always going to have to trade for US dollars. And so that's kind of how they replaced the backing of gold, so that the currency still in people's minds had value. Because if people don't believe that a paper money has value, then it doesn't. That's kind of how that works. Taxes work the same way. You can only pay your taxes to the US government in US dollars, and thus you have to deal in US dollars, right? Because otherwise, like, you'd be better off with like gold or silver or some like cryptocurrency, but you can't really pay your taxes in those things. So you're incentivized to trade and make exchanges for US dollars because you're going to have to pay your taxes in them. But anyway, so this has kind of been the status quo for, 50 plus years now. And it's a big reason why the US has become the global hegemon, because every country has needed to have, dollars from the US Treasury. They need US currency in order to trade for oil globally. And, recently, as in like the past decade, there's been more than a handful of breaks from that agreement. And so, Venezuela was one of these sort of defecting from the US petrodollar system countries. And most of the other ones, which is, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, I think it is Libya, Syria, a couple others. I don't know if Iraq was one or not. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But, a lot of these other countries have been part of U.S. interventionism in the past couple decades. And I would say that is tied into this fact that they were defecting from the petrodollar system and starting to exchange, their own currencies for oil, or selling to other big countries like Russia or China in Russian or Chinese currency. So just something to be aware of. Everybody's like, oh, it's just for the oil. It's just for the oil. I mean, to an extent, but understand, like, do your Googles on the petrodollar system and take that into account, because I think that is a much more important factor if you're trying to get like the big picture of what's going on here. And then kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on in this video that's just kind of related to the Venezuela operation and what's going on with that and what is going on moving forward with the country. Like I said in the last video, like, a lot of people are against this. There is like a certain segment of Trump's base who are rah-rahing and saying this is the greatest and USA, USA, all that. But a lot of people are really sick of this stuff. And not just like the partisans who are Trump's enemies, but like a big segment of the coalition that reelected Trump is really sick of this dynamic that has happened in the first year of Trump. Because it seems really obvious to a lot of us that the Trump administration has the power to affect a lot of change, and especially a lot of the change that it promised during the election campaign to the voters. And a lot of this change that people wanted, primarily the change that people voted for Trump for, is based on domestic policy and the ceasing of all this foreign policy and this focus on foreign policy. And so while this operation seems to have been a gigantic success operationally, as in the immediate goal of the operation was completed, it was done decisively, quickly, with no American lives lost. So you could say in that sense that the operation was very successful, very decisive. That actually makes it, for those of us who want many of the things that Trump campaigned on, it makes it even more frustrating, because it showed the hand that this administration does have the power to affect these things. This administration could defy the various domestic actors that are preventing the domestic policy from being pushed through. But they don't want to fight those battles. They'd prefer to fight these foreign policy battles that will not actually improve the lives of Americans. Sure, is this getting one of the big oil companies an enforcement on their contract? You know, as in, this is an American company. They had a contract for these resources. Then a new leader came into power and reneged on said contract. And so I think there is a valid argument that, well, it's not like the oil company under international law can hire a mercenary group and enforce the terms of the contract on this new government. That's not really how things work. So there is like this argument where, well, it is the obligation of the federal government to enforce the rights of its citizens, and the corporation being run by American citizens, you know, so there's an argument there. But the reality is this operation is not delivering on any of the promises that that the Trump administration made during the election campaign. And I really don't think that there will be. You know, they're saying, oh, well, we're going to have cheaper oil. Oh, well, $17 trillion in oil. Oh, well, whatever. Bookmark it. Let's revisit it in 5 years. Tell me, and then you and me, we can talk about, was your life improved in any way based on this policy being enacted in Venezuela? Meanwhile, you're expending a lot of this political capital that you could have used on domestic issues that actually would benefit Americans. You're also risking destabilizing this country, which could lead to more of a refugee crisis, more of a refugee influx. Say a Republican doesn't get elected in 28, and there's this refugee crisis, but the Republicans kept the border closed. Well, if the refugee crisis lasts into the next Democrat administration, then you're going to get a bunch of... So I'm just saying, you're risking a lot of things that you eventually won't have control of. I'm not under the illusion that the Republicans are going to rule for the next 20 years in the executive. So unless you're under that illusion, who knows? Maybe they will. I don't think so. But if you're assuming that, you might get proven wrong and you might be shooting yourself in your foot when you could have been focusing on all these domestic policies. You could have been pushing through all this domestic policy that you promised your voter base. And yeah, would your enemies call you a dictator for pushing it through, for, I don't know, getting rid of the filibuster, for whatever, for deposing some of these judges that have, tried to counter all these various domestic policies that the populace very obviously wants? But instead, you're blowing all your political capital on Venezuela, which, first of all, that wasn't a campaign issue at all, because that would be a stupid thing to campaign on. Nobody cares about Venezuela. The voter base does not care about Venezuela. Now they might be celebrating it because they're so desperate for a win, because the domestic policy wins list has been essentially non-existent. But nobody during the campaign was running on that, and no voters were demanding it. So I think that's really what people are most frustrated by. They see that this administration has the power to push things through, to do things that the opposition does not want, and yet they are spending all their political capital on all of these foreign policy, decisions, and they're not even popular. Who wants to go to war with Iran? Who wanted to strike Iran? Iran is not an imminent threat to the U.S., and neither was Venezuela. You know what is an imminent threat to the U.S.? Immigration, widespread fraud throughout the country, the deficit, inflation, the empire. So I think, this administration really needs to wrap its head around the fact that if it does not stop with the adventurism abroad and focus in on the domestic policy goals that they alleged that they were interested in affecting, they're going to get absolutely creamed next year in the midterms. Absolutely destroyed. Anyway, you guys tell me what you think. How do you feel about the Venezuela operation? Are you happy that there is the same amount of fentanyl coming into the country now as there was before, since there was essentially no fentanyl coming in from Venezuela? Are you happy that we overthrew a communist dictator? Are you happy for the oil companies? Am I way off base? Let me know. Like, share, subscribe, comment, do all that stuff. Send me hate mail if you disagree. Go follow me on Twitter. I misspelled my own username yesterday, which is funny. It's that guy, Sky High. Sky has 2 Y's, but that's how you spell it. That guy, Sky High, on Twitter. And on Instagram, Skyler, SKYLER _Carnes, KARNS. Those are the places to follow me. Subscribe here if you're interested in more videos. Like I said, I'm going to try to get on a regular schedule for videos. So if you want to see them, subscribe, like, comment, share, all that stuff. If you watch the whole thing, appreciate it. Catch you guys next time. Later.